To date, there are more than 2,400 manuscripts with the full vowel pointings of the name of Yehovah. How do we know that? It's due to the work of Nehemiah Gordon. But Nehemiah, welcome to Shabbatnet Live.
Thanks,
there are places where there is a missing vowel, you tell me. What's this all about?
So in most manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, when they come to the name Yud He Vav He, they put in the first vowel and they put in the third vowel and they leave out the second vowel. This is in something like 80% of the manuscripts. They leave out the vowels in most places. And this was something years ago I was studying and researching. I've done teaching on this. One of the best teachings I've ever done, actually, is in the Open Door series that I did with Michael. And it's an episode called The Tower That Still Stands. And I tell the story there. I think it's there that I share the incident. I'm not going to repeat that. But what I discovered is that in the Alepo Codex, what's considered the most accurate, most authoritative manuscript of the Tanakh that exists. It was the one that even 1,000 years ago, scholars would come from all over the Jewish world to check their Bibles against the Alepo Codex, back when it was in Jerusalem. That manuscript, in most instances, there's a missing vowel that's missing, it's not there, and every once in a while they put that vowel in, and it spells out the pronunciation Yehovah. I'd originally found this in the two key manuscripts of the Tanakh, the Leningrad Codex and the Alepo Codex. And then the challenge came and they said, well, Nehemiah, that's just two manuscripts. Well, it's two of the most important. Okay, but it's just two manuscripts, Nehemiah, just two scribes who maybe thought that was the vowels, or they made a mistake and put that vowel in. This is what was argued. And they ended up saying, okay, let's find a third manuscript. I found a third, and then a fourth, and a fifth. Today we have over 2,400 manuscripts. And look, there are people who have said to me, Nehemiah, I don't care if you have 10,000 manuscripts. Those are the vowels of Adonai. This is the standard argument. I've done many teachings about this. I don't want to go into that aspect of it. What's significant is that I did a teaching a number of years back, Scott, in which I argued that when the scribe of the Alepo Codex put in the full vowels, he did it by mistake, right? That's been essentially my argument. Why do I think he did it by mistake? Because in most places he didn't put in the full vowels. Meaning that tells you what his intention was. His intention was to leave out that middle vowel. And when he puts it in, it's because it's a slip of the mind where he knows that's the vowel and he puts it in. And he always puts in that O when he puts in the middle vowel. So I had done a teaching a few years back, Scott, in which I had spoken to a man who got to study the Alepo Codex directly. He sat with the Alepo Codex and studied it, and they compiled what I was told was a database. And in this database, he told me, to his recollection, they never erased a vowel or accent of God's name. And when he told me that, I'm like, wow, so that explains why in those places where the scribe put in the O, he couldn't go and erase it in order to hide what that vowel was, because he wasn't allowed to erase the vowels of God's name. This is what I was told by this old man who had studied this in the late 70s and early 80s directly with the Alepo Codex and created the database. Well, I remember at the time I did this teaching, I said, I wish I could see this for myself and verify it. I wish I could see the database. So I got to see the database. And I almost immediately saw that was wrong. That not only did they erase the vowels and accents, they erased the actual letters of God's name in the Alepo Codex. I eventually got to study the Alepo Codex myself directly. I spent 9 hours with it. I examined it with a microscope, with infrared and ultraviolet, and there's no question that they erased not only the accents and vowels of Yud He Vav He, but the actual consonants.
Now this is rare information because I don't know if I've heard of anybody going through the Alepo Codex with a microscope.
As far as I know.
And infrared, for that matter.
Yeah, as far as I know, I'm the only one to do a microscope at 50x, infrared and ultraviolet. If there is somebody else, let me know who that is.
Now the database we're talking about is this where you're talking about there was a database of
Yeah, it was actually a stack of papers. It was an analog database, right? Meaning like there was a line and it had what's called a lemma, and then it had, okay, here's what we found. Right, so it was the rumor of the database was greatly exaggerated. It was a database.
This is not a thumb drive. This is
it was an analog. What back then they thought of as a database, I guess. Right, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be our modern definition. So I got an amazing opportunity to go to Geneva, Switzerland, where they have one of the 6 key manuscripts of the Bible. It's the only one of the 6 key manuscripts that's in private hands.
Oh.
All the others belong to institutions. And that manuscript is known as Sassoon 1053. Sassoon was this family of merchants, of Jewish merchants who were in Hong Kong and Iraq and England. And at one point, one of the people in the family who had this key manuscript died. And because the British have this death tax, right? You pay taxes when you're alive, but then when you die, your estate has to pay taxes. And they had to sell off these manuscripts because of the death tax. And somebody in Geneva, Switzerland, bought the manuscript. And for years, nobody knew exactly where it was. They had some idea. There was a rumor that it was the guy in Switzerland, but we didn't know for sure, and nobody had studied it. And I got to go to Switzerland. Now, why is this manuscript so important? It's referred to in a list. There's a synagogue that existed in Cairo. And this was at a time when the Alepo Codex, before it was called the Alepo Codex, it was just called the Crown. Al-Taj or Haketer, it was called the Crown. And there's a list of the books that are in a certain synagogue in Cairo. And it mentions there that in this list of books, they have a manuscript of the Bible called the Brother of the Crown.
The brother, so this is the...
So the Sassoon 1053 is believed by scholars to be the Brother of the Crown, the brother of the Alepo Codex.
So why do they call it the brother? Is it that similar?
So the reason they call it the brother is, number one, it's from that period.
Okay.
And number two, it's the earliest reference to the Alepo Codex outside the Alepo Codex.
Okay.
Right? It refers to the manuscript of the Bible written by Aaron ben Asher, which is what the Alepo Codex is, in the actual manuscript of the Sassoon 1053 itself,
wow.
right?
Okay.
So the Sassoon 1053, the Brother of the Crown, I'm studying this in Geneva, Switzerland, and I had found some places in the Alepo Codex in which I believed, and I had argued, that not only did they erase the vowels and accents, but the actual letters. But it's very difficult to prove, because how do you prove what they erased? They've erased it, right? So we saw in previous episodes how you can see traces. You can see the outline of an aleph and the remnants of a vav. Well, in these cases with Yud He Vav He, they wrote another word over it in the Alepo Codex. They wrote Adonai over it, and in one case a different word over it. When it came to the Brother of the Crown in Geneva, Switzerland, in 1 Samuel 16:9, I have what is definitive proof. By the way, here you can see me in Geneva, sitting. I'm like the proverbial Cheshire cat standing over that's the type of smile where I'm actually holding back, because there I am holding the Brother of the Crown, Sassoon 1053, a manuscript I'd searched for years. Every time I met somebody who I thought might have some connection to this person in Switzerland, I'd say, do you know so-and-so? And then out of the blue, I'm invited to come and examine this manuscript.
I'm assuming that's a very rare opportunity if it's in private hands like it is.
So I asked the owner of the manuscript when I met him, how many scholars have come before me and the two people who came with me? He said, you're the first ones.
Really?
Yeah.
He
had purchased the manuscript, and he stuck it in a vault. And I don't know, it was literally a vault. He stuck it somewhere, I didn't know where, right? Because we actually met in a third location, right? In an outside location, because we weren't allowed to know where this was kept exactly, right? It was kept in some secret location for insurance reasons, right? I mean, it's worth millions of dollars. And we go there to examine it, and we had armed guards outside, literally. There's armed guards outside as we're examining this manuscript in this warehouse. And I got to spend 3 days with this codex, with this manuscript of the Hebrew Bible, studying it, also using the microscope with ultraviolet and infrared. And there was one passage, though, where I found it didn't require ultraviolet and infrared. It was as clear as day what had happened.
Oh, look at that.
Now, there's two images here, because one is the end of a column and the beginning of the next column. And what happened here in the Brother of the Alepo Codex is in 1 Samuel 16:9. And what happened is the scribe made a mistake. We looked at mistakes in Torah scrolls. This is a mistake in a codex, which is the book form, right? Codex is the opposite of a scroll. It's like a modern book, except it's written by hand on parchment. And what the scribe did is he accidentally copied the verse 1 Samuel 16:9 twice. And when he realized the mistake, instead of erasing the entire verse the first time, he kept the second instance for whatever reason. Instead of erasing just the entire verse, he only erased the bottom half of the verse. And why did he do that? Because in Hebrew manuscripts, if there's a space in the manuscript, certain types of spaces have meaning. They tell you this is the end of a thought and the beginning of a new thought. There are prophecies where those spaces can change the meaning of the prophecy. Is verse 12 part of verse 11 or does it belong to verse 13? Well, the space tells you that. And so here he didn't want to create a new space in this manuscript. This is a scribe 1,000 years ago, really like 1,100 years ago, meaning in the 900s in Israel. He's copying this manuscript. He's written 1 Samuel 16:9 twice, and he erases the bottom of the letters. Why is that important for the name Yehovah? So I was told, Nehemiah, they never made mistakes with the name, and if they did, they would remove it from circulation and you'd never find it. And I got news for you guys. I can find things that were removed from circulation. They still exist.
They're just in private hands, that's all.
Well, in this case, it's in private hands because he bought it at an auction. But this was used by a Jewish community for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was used at one point by the Jews of Cairo, and somehow it ends up in the hands of this Sassoon collector, and now in the hands of a Jew who lives in Geneva, Jacques Safra, a very important family of philanthropists. The campus of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is named after his uncle. Right, it's a very important and respected family of philanthropists. He now owns this manuscript. So here you can see that the bottom half of the verse, right, not the second half, the bottom half of the verse, the bottom half of each letter was erased, and that was to erase the words without creating an extra space. So I come along as a reader and I say, okay, he made a mistake and he erased it, but this isn't a space that's meant to be interpreted as the end of a thought. What's so important about this is because he wrote the same verse twice, I can read what's been erased. And because he left the top half, I can still read what's been erased, right? And I know exactly what it's supposed to say because he wrote it twice, right? So, and why did he write it twice? Let me jump over here and show you. This was an example where it was bound to make a mistake, or a mistake was bound to happen. We have 3 times in a row where in the text as it's supposed to appear, we have the word and he passed over, or he caused to pass over. This is the scene in 1 Samuel 16 where Samuel comes to Jesse. And he wants to see the one that Yehovah has chosen as to be anointed with oil, essentially as the Messiah of that period. And Jesse brings his eldest son, and he brings the next son, and the word there is he caused to pass before Samuel. And we have 3 times the letters Vav, Yud, Ayin, Bet, Resh, Vaya'aver, first time it's Vaya'avirehu, and he passed him over, and then Vaya'aver, and he passed him over, and he caused to pass over. And twice you have the exact same words, and Jesse caused to pass over at the beginning of verse 9 and at the beginning of verse 10, and just above it you have, and he passed him over, right? So you have 3 times the same exact word that begins a clause, meaning part of a sentence. And then you have 3 times in the same area where it ends a sentence, or part of a sentence. Lo bachal Yehovah, Yehovah did not choose, Yehovah did not choose, Yehovah did not choose. So why is this important? So the scribe is copying. And how does the scribe copy? He looks at the text at the empty page that he's copying, and he looks at the one he's copying from, and he puts into his temporary memory 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, right? And maybe he says them according to some traditions. He pronounces the words perhaps, and then he writes down what he has in his memory or what he just pronounced. And he looks back and he copies a few more words. And he looks back and he copies a few more words. And then every once in a while he looks back and his eye jumps and he looks at the wrong place. And why is this the type of thing that would happen as a common error we would expect? Because if you have the same phrase repeating, 2 phrases that repeat, and he caused them to pass, and Yehovah did not choose, right? So the beginning and the end have the same phrase. And what happened is as he was copying, his eye jumped from one of those phrases to the next phrase. And he ended up copying the same verse twice. He thought he was copying the next verse, but he thought he was copying verse 10, but he really copied verse 9 twice.
Pretty innocent mistake. Yep.
Very innocent mistake, happens all the time, but this is a beautiful example of it, right? This is the type, if I was looking for this type of mistake, I would look in 100 manuscripts and I'd probably find 5 of them where this mistake, or 1 or 2 maybe, right? I'd find manuscripts, this is where I would expect the mistake to happen.
So within this, and the important part, I guess, that I'm assuming is that in the scratched off portion where there's still half the...
We know what it says!
You know what it says? And he scratched off the word of Yehovah.
He actually scratched off the name of Yehovah.
The name of Yehovah, yeah, he did.
It says Vayaver, Shama, Yishai, Vayomer Gam Bazeh, and I can read at the bottom where it says the name, that is Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. I know from the top half of the letters, I'm not speculating that's what was erased. I can still read it.
Yeah.
Because he only has scratched off the bottom half of it. And this is huge, Scott, because up until now I've been able to suggest, to argue, to present what I think is evidence pointing to the erasure of God's name in the Aleppo Codex, right? Contrary to what I was taught and contrary to what I taught, because I was sharing what I was told, and I said I wish I could verify it for myself, and I verified that it was wrong, that they actually erased God's name not only in the Aleppo Codex, but in the brother of the crown. And this you can't say, well, he didn't erase Yud He Vav He. He obviously erased Yud He Vav He.
So now in the tradition of where you are absolutely not supposed to do such things, you're at least supposed to cut it out, as we learned.
We saw that in Torah scrolls. So why did the scribe do it?
Yeah,
so
and how did he get away with it? I mean,
two possibilities, and those are actually two different questions, right? How did he get away with it? So the answer has to be that he was not a rabbinical scribe. We looked at Deuteronomy 12, 3 and 4, and I said, well, in the context, it doesn't mean don't erase God's name, but the rabbis interpreted it to mean don't erase God's name even when it's written by mistake. But in the context of Deuteronomy 12, 3 and 4, we don't have time to go over it again, but in that context, the meaning of those of the commandment there is don't worship God the way the pagans worship their gods. The rabbis interpret it to mean don't erase God's name even when it's written by mistake. So there's no way any rabbinical scribe did this. It's impossible. This had to be a Karaite scribe. We can say 100% definitively two things. The scribe was a Karaite, and then very likely his patron, whoever owned the manuscript, was a Karaite. Because if the Karaite scribe had erased God's name, that would have upset his patron as well, right? He was working for somebody, maybe a community. So this had to have belonged at some point to a Karaite community. And I think we can suggest a similar thing about the Aleppo Codex. So here's an example where the word Adonai, Lord, in Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 3, is written over some erasure. And what would they erase? What could it possibly be? More than likely, it's Yehovah, and I can only say more than likely, right? I can't read yet. One day I will be able to, hopefully with technology. I can't yet read what was erased in this instance. Here's a case from another manuscript written by the same scribe who wrote the consonants of the Aleppo Codex, and here definitively I can say he erased Yehovah because I can still make out the letters. Yep. Here's another case, and I'll end with this. This is Malachi chapter 1, verse 12 in the Aleppo Codex. And what you can see is Adonai is written over an erasure. And are we going to have another segment after this of 20 minutes, or is this?
Yes,
or is this
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to continue. I'm going to save the next thing because it's really exciting. But here, let me just set this up. Malachi chapter 1, verse 12. It says, when you say it says, and you desecrate. I love the context here because it's so beautiful. And you desecrate it when you say the table of the Lord is defiled, right? And the word for Lord there in Hebrew is Adonai. It's not Yehovah, but it's written over an erasure. In the Aleppo Codex, it's written over an erasure. And it seems that what the scribe originally wrote was some other word that would fit there. What could that word be? Probably Yehovah. Now, here's the beautiful thing. The scribe who wrote the consonants of the Aleppo Codex wrote another manuscript. And this is that other manuscript. And here we can actually make out the letters Yud He Vav He. So I'm not speculating here that the scribe who wrote the Aleppo Codex was named Shlomo ben Buya'a. He was the one who wrote the consonants. He wrote Adonai. He wrote Yehovah, and the scribe who wrote the accents and the vowels came along and said that's a mistake and scratched it out and wrote Adonai in its place.
Wow.
And I want to pick that up when we come back.
Okay.
Because I talked in a previous program about Christian David Ginsburg, about how he argued that the 134 places where it says Adonai, that originally it said Yehovah, and this is one of those places. And now it's not speculation. I mean, Ginsburg to some extent was speculating. He was saying originally it said Yehovah and they changed it to Adonai. Here I can see originally it said Yehovah. I can actually make out the letters in this manuscript, and in the Aleppo Codex I can see something was erased in the same exact verse, in the same exact place.
I can only imagine your reaction when you first found these.
I was like, Oh no, this is not supposed to exist, but here it is. I have the truth now.
All right, more truth coming up right after this. We're going to give you a couple minutes to support Shabbat Night Live. We want to thank you in advance because you brought Nehemiah here and you provide the opportunity for others to see this program. So we thank you again in advance for supporting this program. We'll give you a couple minutes. See you then.